Yeah.
I don't know.
Is anyone not ready? Unity connection was guaranteed wars in favor to conclusion and the Houthis of pull the heavy vesting for Yemen is for the West to leave the region. Military concludes that the Houthis have won the war in Yemen and are in no hurry to end a war. No policy seeking to bring peace is up to the Yemenis, not the Americans. A first principle should call for an immediate and total halt to all foreign interference in Yemen. Unfortunately, the U.S. increased diplomatic efforts as fuel the fire by voting the Houthis, applying the right to Biden has demonstrated commitment to setting up diplomacy and then all American support for offensive operations. Following his decision, the Houthis stepped up their military offensive. Simply proving this avenue continues that since 2015, the Houthis use ceasefire opportunities to expand militarily. Diplomatic efforts are basically the delusion that the Houthis are open to a political solution. Failed to recognize that will prolong the conflict. The impact of this is devastating. UNICEF reports Yemen remains one of the largest humanitarian crises with 17.8 million lack access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene services. 2022 quantified to the war in Yemen has killed 377,000 people. Mentioned two is China. The Biden administration is focused solely on a Pacific Island diplomatic strategy. So almost 22 wrote that Biden is lavishing attention on the Pacific. The administration plans to expand the number of diplomatic missions from 6 to 9 across the Pacific. This focus has come from a shift away from West Asia. Jacobus 22 argues that Biden has prioritized downsizing the U.S. footprint in West Asia and countering the present threats originating from China. Renewed diplomacy would forcibly trade off for two reasons. First, diplomatic efforts are finite. Cook argues that given finite resources and capacities, the United States must often make hard choices on how much diplomatic capital to invest. They cannot invest equally in every crisis, and decisions are made case by case. Second, new diplomatic efforts when does a state deprioritizing China? White 22 argues that the Biden administration concentrated on its Asian ambitions. China comprehensively challenges the international order. The State Department has redoubled efforts. U.S. officials willing to make continuing progress with the tendency to focus on a few critical projects with adequate funding rather than spreading too thinly. There are two impacts. First, it's spreading to U.S.-China war. Only diplomacy can stop China. 7022 explains the U.S. diplomacy tended to neglect other regions. China has filled the vacuum for the detriment of America and is actively combining its diplomatic power to cultivate partnerships. U.S. diplomacy needs to counter China's influence by recommitting to diplomacy and frequent engagement with countries to draw them away from China's orbit. This stops U.S.-China war. Fazio 21 writes that Biden is responding to China's assertiveness in the Asia-Pacific, reaffirming its regional alliance. Active diplomacy between the U.S. and its regional allies may be the best way to constrain Z, knowing it's unlikely to prevail could constrain China's behavior. Diplomacy provides a strong mechanism to contain China and avoid disastrous conflict. Additionally, including China in dialogue prevents great power war. Further, 22 warrants the U.S. and Chinese want to keep competition from escalating to armed conflict that can lead to nuclear war. The U.S. and its allies have interest in pursuing and inviting China's dialogue on strategic stability. The U.S. should acknowledge the necessary policy. If China and the U.S. can't sustain dialogue, they will keep their relationship with no security hazard in non-violent cohabitation. A U.S.-China war goes nuclear. Thomas 17 explains that a conventional war could lead to Chinese fears that the U.S. may be preparing for nuclear counterwars. China might see nuclear escalation as its least bad response to this threat that causes extinction. Star finds that nuclear war would cause humans to die from nuclear agreement in a mass extinction event. And the U.S.-China war would be horrific even if limited. China 22 finds that the U.S.-China war could cost over 2 billion life years in the combined countries, even before taking into account nuclear escalation. Even less fervent wartime scenarios would reduce global GDP by double digits and plunge perhaps 5% of the world's population back into extreme poverty. Second is climate change. The U.S. and China have increased climate diplomacy recently. James writes in November that Biden and Xi agreed to resume cooperation on climate change at the G20 summit. Maintaining this cooperation is critical for climate change efforts. Figure 21 finds the visions for new tech to address climate change are based on collaboration in global markets. It all starts with the two biggest players, the U.S. and China. That's specifically key. With the ICE awards, that China and the U.S. are responsible for 38% of global greenhouse gas emissions, will largely dictate how fast the planet heats up. The amount is linear. Any increase in emissions increases deaths. Article 19 finds that one premature death is caused every time roughly 1,000 tons of carbon are burned, leading China 21 to conclude that climate change would cause 83 million deaths by 2100. Let's say I'm happy. Are you using these?
Yeah, I'm using it. Oh, and I think we need 2 sheets of paper, so 2 different colors.
You guys do this? I do. More.
Okay.
Anyone? First on the Orientalism IBID next construction of China's rise as a dangerous is a continuation of the self-other dichotomy that depicts China as a foreign or other in order to justify U.S. intervention and violence. Their rhetoric of needing to contain China and depicting Xi as belligerent and needing to counter Chinese influence are all linked in. Turner 13 says that the modern day China threat to the U.S. and imagined construction of American design and product of societal representation danger can be ascribed to otherness, wherever it may be found. Perceptions of China's threats provoke crises of American identity. Processes of power representation have been complicit at every stage of the formulation, enactment, and justification of U.S.-China policy. Those policies themselves have been reaffirmed the discourses of separation and the difference which makes China foreign from the U.S. American representation of PRC becomes the focus in concerted scholarly attention. Rhetoric is reason enough to drop them. Two warrants. A, the Turner evidence warrants that representation have played a part in every role of America's xenophobic Orientalist policy, and by them contributing to their scholarship is contributing to play a role. And B, racist rhetoric is something that on face you're valid to reprimand, rather than pointing to a singular action and critiquing them. They've chosen to make a largely unwarranted claim that China writ large is evil and that rhetoric is demonizing and racist. Now to the substance, we affirm versus framing preferred impacts regarding women regarding structural violence to improve advocacy skills. Debating about things like gender disparities creates the tools to solve policymaking issues in the real world. Rowland Sandler 16. There's been a notable shift in securing attention to gender equality in large foundations and institutions. Feminist officials' potential to support social transformative action depends on them having a feminist commitment and motivation combined with the political ability to operate strategically within the confines of a bureaucratic system. Pursuing the gender equality can be working both within institutions to change norms and practices and outside institutions to build pressure on institutions to change. Thus, the role of the ballot is to vote for the team that best mitigates structural violence. Our first contention is gender equality. U.S. diplomacy is key to improve gender rights in West Asia. It's at the forefront of Biden's approach. Page 21. Biden has taken a strong stance of promotion of women's rights in foreign policy. Biden created the Gender Policy Council to advance equity. The administration is appointing record number of women to cabinet positions as a world major actor. The U.S. is seen as the leading opinion maker when it comes to the Middle East. The U.S. plays an important role in political reality. Specifically, U.S. pressure could be applied to Turkey. That's all because Erdogan's election and economic troubles. Ringler 21. Turkey's response to crises leading up to elections by 2023 will determine the relationship with the U.S. Turkey's desire for beneficial relations with the U.S. will provide opportunities for engagement. Erdogan is taking but not risk oblivious. He'll test its limits of the U.S. The impact is gender violence. Turkey will use expanded influence to attack women. Brightman 21. Whenever Ankara has expanded its influence, women's rights have decreased. From Libya to Qatar, Turkey's targeted Kurdish women. In Syria, women played a key role in politics. Turkey has rounded them up and imprisoned them on terror charges despite having no evidence. Contingent to is climate diplomacy. West Asia is worst off region when it comes to effects of climate change. It's impossible to ignore. Ramahan 22. West Asia is among the regions worst affected by climate change. Water scarcity alone is estimated to cause countries in the region a GDP loss of 6% by 2050. The region is home to 12 of the 17 world's most water scarce countries, and climate change is expected to increase this further. The developed world promised to spend $100 billion each year to combat the crisis. However, the countries have failed. Fortunately, diplomacy to address climate change is conflict prevention and resolution. Brady 22 says that announced prevention is worth a pound of fear. U.S. conflict policy must meet the future by centering climate change with conflict prevention. The U.S. needs to remain committed to a conflict prevention agenda which recognizes the influence of climate change. Climate change can drive unstable social, economic, and political conditions. That means selecting priority countries and moving forward with investments in conflict prevention that are actively informed by climate change. Indeed, Biden has already limited bilateral agreements. For me, is key for regional discussions. Petals in June 21. While various country-specific bilateral climate programs are run by the U.S., could help a wider regional approach that leverages the region's wealth and technical know-how. How would be beneficial for other differences between the U.S. and countries such as Saudi Arabia. These countries will play an important role in efforts to implement a global strategy and energy strategy and combat climate change. Locally regional treaty has global impact. American leadership is the only path. Movement 21. The world sees the importance of U.S. action and cut the card there. The impact is gender equality. UN 22 says 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. So I only went to like the first line.
Okay, very good house.
Yeah.
Let's sit or sit.
Up to you.
Sure,
You want to sit?
I can sit.
Okay.
Okay. Can I have the first question?
Of course.
Okay. Is like this gender diplomacy, is that used to resolve internal conflicts?
Yeah, so for C1, I'm assuming, yeah, so we say with our Franceman card that empirically, Turkey has used all of like their leverage and influence to attack Kurdish women, and they've like imprisoned them on fair charges, so that's the internal conflict that we're solving. Can I have a question?
Sure.
Okay, so let's talk about nuclear, or let's talk about like this trade-off with China. Couldn't the US still like talk with China regardless of if like they're helping West Asia?
I mean, no, like, I think that before the shift to the Pacific, we had no talks, kind of literally cut off the US. We weren't focused enough on China, on the Pacific. It's not effective. It's not whether or not it's happening really, it's more a question of what the quality of the diplomacy is like. Okay, mine is about Turkey. How have Turkey-US relations looked like in the past?
I mean, the US has been disengaging now.
I mean, like when they were trying to have diplomacy, what happened?
I'm sure you can tell me.
Yeah, so what Turkey did was they used any kind of US involvement diplomatically and militarily to like be more aggressive. What Erdogan did was he just had a bunch of rhetoric, anti-American sentiment, anti-American rhetoric, and what he did instead was put his policies against American interests.
Yeah, but the difference with the status quo is really important because the Ringler evidence tells you that right now Erdogan has to have the US as his ally because he has the 2023 election. So he's willing to like cave to all the pressure and bend down backwards for the US.
That makes zero sense because his actual motive, right? So his political image is literally centered around America sucks. We don't like America. That's literally his public position. And so if he really did want to do well in his election, instead he would continue that same anti-American sentiment, that same anti-American rhetoric. That is only perpetuated by you guys.
But sure, you can have a question.
I forgot.
Okay, can I have a question?
Yeah.
So let's talk about nuclear extinction. Why would China want to like go on to a nuclear extinction or like go nuclear when like we don't talk to them? Like what's that want?
I mean, they don't necessarily want to, but if they see the US and they're like, oh, they might be proliferating, they look like they're about to strike us, let's first strike instead. So that's the incentive.
So you're saying she is like an irrational actor and he's just like, oh, we're not talking with the US, let's just call it one.
No, I just give you the very, very clear warning. The warranting is that when they see the US militarize, proliferate, or whatever, and they think, hey, the US is probably going to strike us, like even nuclearly, that's when they have that first strike. That's their evidence. It's pretty explosive there.
Okay.
Process these way up.
You have like 20 seconds.
Oh, I have 10 seconds. That's fine.
Give me some. Okay, so we have 2 minutes left. We'll switch out.
I need another sheet.
Yeah.
Okay. I have 5 sheets. What? Yeah.
It's been sent.
I just got, you know,
It's gonna be. Actually, okay, so it's gonna be on the K, a show, that's, I guess, in response to their framing, or I guess, float probably at the top of their case, and then down their case, on framing.
wait, is this T or what did you say?
I mean, it's just gonna be a show. I
Okay.
mean, it's gonna be top down. So really good. Fantastic. I'm so tired.
Starting one?
Yeah, are you good?
Yeah, sorry.
Fantastic. Let's start on the K. There's a couple major holes in it. They say the net otherizes China. The big problem here is they don't point to a single piece of evidence. At that point, it could literally have been written for any other team. There's no reason why Marist evidence uniquely is authorizing China. But let's look to our actual evidence. If we prove that China is a threat, we are not securitizing. We're just being realistic. Look to our CMINO evidence, which looks at what China is actually doing in the region, and they're trying to be expansionists and form dangerous alliances. At that point, we are not authorizing China. We are simply perceiving them as an actual real threat, or make them interact specifically with our evidence. But then we are not saying we should always engage militarily with China. What we're saying uniquely is we need dialogue, which is why Perkovich evidence tells you that what we're doing right now is engaging with China and having dialogue with them. That is the order of the negative. The alternative is conflict, meaning they're the link that you actually perceive China as a threat. Our world has dialogue with China. Their world means that we go to war with them. At that point, there's no reason uniquely. But on their specific warning, they say our scholarship is bad. I want them to point out which specific piece of scholarship are bad. Then they say that we're using racist rhetoric. We do not read racist rhetoric in our case. Make them prove specific piece of evidence which violate if they actually want to win the IBI. But at the point in which they don't feel to pick out specific piece of evidence, that's reason to reject them. It's ephemeral policy making without a tangible change. Class and technical discussions about policy proposals are key to challenge existing power relations. Their rejection of engagement in favor of intellectual abstraction shows dissent. Objectives explain we must interweave nuanced arguments and concerns to critique and challenge one another as we reimagine society. There is much debate about transformative movement building. This much seems clear. A merger of ideological and technical thinking will be needed. They don't have the actual technical thinking. They don't engage without specific piece of evidence. At that point, you have to reject them. It's just ephemeral rhetoric without substantial class. That's a reason to vote against the K. They also don't say uniquely why you should drop us. At that point, they don't win offense. Let's go on the top of their case specifically. Here's a shell about topicality. Interpretation absolutely limited to diplomatic effort for the sole purpose of ending armed conflicts in West Asia involving non-state actors. A, to indicate purpose. Merriam-Webster 22 explains use of the function of the word to indicate purpose, intention, result, or N to internal aid. B, internal armed conflicts involve non-state actors and are legally distinct from interstate issues. Lawton 12 explains a non-international or internal armed conflict refers to violence involving government forces and one or more organized armed groups or between groups in contrast to an international armed conflict which opposes armed forces of state. Violation neither gender equality diplomacy nor climate diplomacy is for the purpose of resolving a current armed conflict between non-state actors, but it's a broader diplomatic strategy. Their C1 is overarching diplomacy claims by Turkey, and their C2 is talking about future potential conflicts, not current internal armed conflicts. Literally nothing in case specifies internal armed conflict. Don't let them make completely new words and future speeches. It's abusive. Vote neg A on limits. Anything else explodes this topic to a tangential diplomatic issues between any combination of countries in West Asia, such as arms sales, sanctions, security alliances, which is impossible to prepare in a month. Ensuring the act can win every debate by breaking new diplomacy contentions. B, education skirts the core controversy of U.S. diplomatic effectiveness and peace talks, which provides a narrow locus of clash. That's key to engagement because the literature is already at by, so there are few diplomacy bad advocates. Reject reasonability. This must be a voting issue to set the precedent for tournaments in January. Otherwise, there'll be a proliferation of apps like this and losing incentive for them to retalk arguments in the future on other topics. But on the framing team cups for core substance and the K on and the role of ballot, if we're unable to have reasonability, we don't see the education or policy making preparation. They talk about the neg must be able to serve as a litmus test for the act. We can't do that if it's not tactical. That's a prerequisite to the role of the ballot. But on the role of the ballot, to vote for the team who did the better debating. Anything else is arbitrary. It insulates the act having to defend the consequences of the advocate's scoring class. On their C1 uniquely about gender, they don't talk about internal armed conflict. There's no reason to evaluate it. Don't let them apply a new word. But on their C2 about climate change, it's uniquely all of their conflict they talk about is hypothetical, meaning we haven't seen the internal armed conflict yet. But on the link level, science diplomacy fails. Marlowe 12 explains leveraging the network of scientists, policy of international relations is difficult. The trust of international partners requires a predictable political and financial environment. Climate leadership is literally impossible because of fracking. But Joe Thursday explains since 2005 we've been fracking shales and have drilled 6,000 shale gas wells. At that point, the U.S. doesn't have the credibility to actually solve it. Doesn't matter. It's not topical. I didn't get to It's the last sentence of UGO, and then science and foreign policy, and then defense. Let me see the documents. Is everyone ready for the order? Sorry. Okay, it's first gonna start on topicality, then go to Orientalism, then then neg. If anyone needs me to repeat that. Is everyone get it? Anyone not ready? Starting on top. On topicality, we literally need first, our first contention, look at the Franzman evidence. It tells you that Turkey is committing violence against Kurdish people with arms. At that point, it is an internal armed conflict because Turkey is weaponizing their weapons against the Kurdish people. Our second contention also means, because we are talking about future conflicts, but none of their evidence says we have to talk about present conflicts. They redo a lot of definitions, and none of them tell you that our grounds are uniquely limited to present conflicts. At the point, we can talk about it because all of their definitions point to the fact that we can. Both of their arguments about why you should drop us, let's address them. A, on limits, we think that there are a lot of arguments. We think that limits or having broader limits is actually a good thing, because you actually have to think on your feet and not just read cards. You have to think analytically. So if anything, having broader limits is a good thing. Then on education, we think our Orientalism argument fundamentally comes first because their entire way of conceptualizing the round is Orientalist and on face something you should reject, but is also contributing to racist policies in the real world. Their argument is just in the debate space. At that point, our education ones are better. Go to Orientalism. I'd like to point out the evidence we talk about in case. The quotes we read are them describing Xi as belligerent and needing to contain China. Look at the top of the 1AC. It is there in quotes. That's from their Fazio and Kimono evidence. We read these in case. We quoted them. We think that is Orientalist. That's basically the only argument they make. Then they say they just have to prove that China is a threat and expanding. No, they have to prove why China expanding in the region is bad. They've just writ large asserted that this is a fact when it is not in an Orientalist description of what China actually is. Then they read this really random thing about like clash is important. Clash is important insofar as A, you don't have a racist culture that is demonizing China. It makes actually engaging in it fair, but B, clash is important. That's why you should actually read warrants and specific actions on what China is doing is bad, not just describe them as belligerent actors that we can't trust at all. Drop them for two reasons that are extending from case. A, they're contributing to racist policies. The Turner evidence tells you that representations matter at each and every level of policymaking, but B, on face, they are using racist rhetoric that is Orientalist and xenophobic in its scholarship. On face, you should probably reject it. On the app, they tell you T comes first before framing and Orientalism. That's not true at all. Both of these impact out to broader than just the debate space, which is a lot more important. Even if they can't engage, the fact that they are thinking about it and we are reading it and other teams are talking about it means that you actually talk about it. We'll concede their role about we're doing a lot better debating. They've basically conceded the Orientalist stuff. At that point, you can extend our gender contingent, which just gets the answer that it's not an internal armed conflict, when it literally is. Look at the Franzman evidence. Turkey is shooting down Kurdish people. That is an internal armed conflict. The argument's super clear. Go to the next flip.
On Yemen, at the top, recognize that their uniqueness backwards. Violence is increasing now. KIP 22 finds that it's been difficult to find peace. The ceasefire lapsed in October. Yemen's population continues to suffer. More than 11,000 children have been injured or killed since 2015. The UN continues to call the situation the worst humanitarian disaster in the world. If we abandon them now, the disaster only gets worse. The Houthis get more emboldened. There's their second intention. On their first link, there's no link. According to Guillermo in 2020, the U.S. can walk and chew gum because of the unparalleled network of allies and partnerships. The U.S. can deal on 2 theaters and then some because of the amount of resources they have. This postdates their evidence. Their second link literally doesn't give you a warrant. It just says that talking to China is important. There's no warrant as to why the trade-off happens. On their first impact, this is what we're talking about. They have described China as belligerent actors in something that needs to be contained. That is Orientalist as hell, and you should reject them for it. They're giving you actual warrants. They're just relying on your preconceived notion that China is a rational actor and something you should vote for. Vote. I'm just for cross movie. And I didn't get to the
We're gonna take a break for us. Here, let's talk about. We have a meeting left. You get the cross. My first question, please.
Sure.
Be good.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your argument about gender on your C1, right? You say your Franklin evidence says the Turkish government is killing individuals who are Kurdish, correct? Because that's why it's an internal armed conflict. Like, well, I have your Franklin evidence pulled up, and literally all of that is a lie. It says wherever Ankara has expanded to influence, women's rights have decreased. How does that imply an internal armed conflict? You're entirely misconstruing the literature.
You just read like one thing from it. It's talking about how Turkey literally kills women when they.
Wait. I'm sorry, but that is objectively false. It says it's rounding them up and imprison them. That does not say they killed them.
I mean, they probably use guns when they do that.
Okay, that is just not true.
You don't think prison guards have guns?
Well, I would argue that still doesn't constitute an internal armed conflict because both groups have to be organized. That's the one thing. So I'd argue that Kurdish women get in prison. Well, I would argue you're specifically isolating violence against Kurdish women. I would also say that saying an ethnic group is organized is ludicrous. It's just an ethnic group. That's like saying
They're literally, they have like a
ethnicity is
defense
organized.
force. They're actively trying to be.
Yes, but your evidence is not about the YPG. Your evidence isn't about the
The
SDF.
Kurdish people
You're-
are organized around
It
that.
says Kurdish women are being imprisoned. How is that an internal armed conflict? You are just saying stuff ad nauseum without responding to orders.
And literally, A, guards probably have it, but B, the Kurdish people are organized. The PKK is literally organized.
So, be your question.
Okay, so let's talk about it. Why, I don't know. Oh, what piece of evidence do you read that says we can't talk about future conflicts?
I would argue that's
Like you read definitions, like which one? Like I just want to see the warrant.
like what is, I mean, that's just the resolution. It says to resolve internal armed conflicts. If the internal armed conflict is not existing right now, then it can't be our intent to resolve it if it's not in play. It would just be climate diplomacy, which is cool, but it's a hypothetical conflict which doesn't exist right now. I have a question. So let's talk about, let's go back to the Orientalism case, right?
Yes,
You say we simply just call she belligerent, right?
that is verbatim. from
Sure.
the case.
Sure, but doesn't it also describe she's policy actions directly through all of the literature we read, right?
So your author saying something is a lot different than you like representing that author to say. We think so. Way you have read the author's claims is just writ large. Chinese influence is bad. We need to contain.
Wait, we didn't say that at all, though. We said US-China conflict is bad, not Chinese
I
influence bad. We said
told
China's good
you.
for climate diplomacy, US-China talks are good because it stops conflict. Where did we say that China is bad and you should add face reject China? And in complete misconstruction.
So I think everything you said in our rebuttal about needing to, like, China has expanded in the region and you need to prevent that. That's a warrantless claim as to why that is bad.
We give you neat warrants in the evidence, just because you choose to ignore them doesn't make them not true.
You can look at the quotes from this.
Okay, the one thing you did from that, that's fine. Are we, do you want to use more for a photo? Yeah, So, just once.
Okay. It's going to be topicality oriental. Is anyone not ready? Awesome. Being loosely around on two fronts. The first is on topicality. What we tell you is that these acts are limited to diplomatic efforts with the sole purpose of ending armed conflicts in West Asia involving non-state actors. What they tell you is two really bad non-topical arguments. What we define as A, that the two resolution indicates purpose, and B, that internal armed conflicts involve non-state actors and are legally distinct from these interstate issues. These things are really important because they violate this in two ways. First of all, under diplomacy, all they're doing is like looking to something that isn't an internal armed conflict. What they tell you is that Turkey is somehow topical, but their evidence only says that the Turkish government is imprisoning women and taking away rights. That's not an internal armed conflict. That's just an abusive government. That's just not topical. But then they talk to you about climate diplomacy. It's about futuristic conflicts. What they'll tell you is that it does not have to be present conflicts, but the intent of the resolution is to resolve internal armed conflicts. The U.S. federal government cannot have that intent for diplomacy or hypothetical conflicts that they talk about. But then I would argue that there are two ways that you vote neg here. First of all, is limits. What they do is for the topic that means that we can't actually prepare well for every single combination of like countries and approaches to diplomacy. This would be really important because then we can't have this high quality discussion. We have better arguments in the round. But then secondly, on education, they don't allow us to focus more on a class and actually have a better, more like focused discussion that's always going to be a lot better on it for the debate space. When you drop them, that means that you set the norms to prevent any kind of non-topical acts happening later on to actually promote better and more high quality discussion. But they'll tell you is that, oh, you can think analytically, but in reality, having higher quality discussion on that's going to be better because in the back half, we're going to see better like analytical thinking when we have better arguments to think analytically to. But then onto Wang. I would argue that their app is only in response to substance. What we're actually telling you is setting norms for the entire debate space. It's always going to be inherently a bigger impact because every single debate and every single real world debate is going to lead to more education. That's basically the main takeaway from debate. At that point, that's always going to be the cleanest voter. Onto Orientalism. Two things here. First of all, like we would argue that we don't reason specific racist rhetoric. All they isolate is that Z is belligerent and we need to contain China. But here's the thing: AR is very explicit with policy analysis and it's telling you how their alliance building is what fuels conflict because through that they're being more aggressive in the region. That's why like their influence is bad in actually creating conflict. Secondly, what we tell you is that we want dialogue, we want peace, we want China to be seen as a good actor. What they're doing is promoting conflict in their world. What our case tells you is that without like any kind of diplomacy, we can't see any kind of resolution between the US and China in these conflicts. That cause would actually promote more sexual violence, promote more xenophobia when we actually see large-scale war between the US and China. That's what our case says. It's not actually xenophobic. But then Third, like as soon as we realize that like we're just being realistic with China actually being a threat and being able to like create war, that's always going to be like more realistic than them just extrapolating it as, oh, it's going to be some kind of racist rhetoric. All we're telling you is that China as a government is always going to be a threat. But what we can do is create peace and not promote more xenophobia through like actual large scale conflict. At that point, you very, very clearly vote on our topicality. All we're saying is that what we do, that's to promote better discussion for every single debate. All they do is like have some very nebulous, small scale critique.
We're gonna take some prep
Moving on our Orientalism and hospitality. Yeah. All of our opponents' rhetoric behind China was very racist when they talk about Chinese presidency as belligerent and needing to contain China. That's really problematic because all of their rhetoric has been fueling all of this Orientalist policies, and they're represent that. You drop the debate for two reasons. One, their scholarship is advocating for a fear-mongering rhetoric against China, but two, you should reprimand all of these like unwarranted claims about Chinese being evil as a whole with your ballot. That's really racist to just say that Chinese is belligerent from one specific thing. They give a few responses, that is like explicitly with, they talk about like just policy, but I implore you to read their cards. It's not just about policies. There's many things that they're just expounding out to China being bad as a whole. Secondly, they talk about how there's needing dialogue, but their whole premise of the case is not wanting dialogue with China. And they also say how like increased Sinophobia comes with war, but considering the fact that their war scenario is very unlikely, it's not going to happen. What's really likely here is the in-person discussions that we're having that translates out to the real world. But the third thing they say is that they have to be realistic with Chinese threat. But considering the fact that they're just like blowing up China as a threat, we think the better issue is to talk about it and have a more inclusive debate. With that, they talk about how we impact out to like real world, outside the debate, real world education. Even if you do believe all of their topicality arguments, we still outweigh on scope. At best, they're only impacting the debate space, but we're on net impacting all of the education because we're having discourse, we're being more inclusive, and we're not having any racist rhetoric around China. Let's go on to their topicality argument. At the top, they talk about like the definitions, but our Frenchman evidence is really good. Remember, like we quote that like Turkey has a war on women. That's a quote from the Frenchman evidence, and that's really important because women are an organization. Turkey is an organization. Women are part of the People Protections Unit, which means that they are organized institution that Turkey imprisons, probably with arms, because how else will they imprison other women? But let's go on to like their standards of like limits and education. Remember that like the limits of this the limits on this debate are really massive. So that means that it's going to be like big anyway. But two, we think that analytics is better because having a real world discussion on analytics is at best better than having like a discussion of something very improbable like climate change that we're only going for like the back half for like nuclear war. But on education, remember that even if you do believe that we link in on a broader scope because we're impacting the whole conversations outside the debate space. But even so, we think that like Orientalism always comes first because when you want education, you want to be more inclusive in that education. You want to have all of the rhetoric that's not like Chinese bad because they are. But at the end of the day, it was game over when they didn't respond to how our Orientalism impacts out to the real world. At best, they're impacting out to debate.
Good for Grand Cross. Just sit down. Can I have a question, please?
Go for it.
I just want to clarify, you read your K about Orientalism in a debate round, correct?
Yeah.
No, you can have one.
So on your argument about, actually, you can take a question.
Okay, sure. So what was your Orientalism argument in response to it?
Quotes from your authors.
All right, cool. You have a question.
Okay, so
If you all don't have a question, I can ask one.
Or let's
yeah.
Sure, I'll just pick one. So let's talk about like your standard of education, right? You're saying that like by having like topical discussions, it's going to include like better education, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So like for just having topical discussions, basically.
Yes, because we're able to prepare more for the round, we have more knowledge about the round, and discussion's a lot more focused. That means that from the front half, we already have better, more high quality arguments to interact with. All you're saying is, oh, now we can have this very like shallow discussion. What we do is make the back half, and thus like the analytical thinking, a lot better. That's what like we actually see happen in the debate space when you set norms to not read non-topical arguments.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Let's talk about your K again, right? You said that the K outweighs topicality because you have real world impacts, right? Yeah. If we were not having this debate, we would not be talking about Orientalism, right?
I think you're kind of missing the
I'm
point.
just asking a yes or no question. I don't need a long-winded answer.
Well, I'll give you a long-winded answer. So you're missing the point. The Turner evidence tells you that representations inside the debate sphere matter. In fact, they
Okay,
influence at
that's
each and
my
every
question.
level.
That representations in the debate sphere matter. If that is true, people have to be in the space first, correct, before we have that discussion.
You didn't make a prereq argument.
I mean, I'm just like
Speech
asking you,
you're
that's just
trying
like
to
a logical claim, because you say the way you give in second summary is
Yeah.
saying that like you impact out inclusivity, because like, it's
But
the
the
biggest thing out of ground, right?
Yeah, but the thing is that like we're impacting to other people outside the realm, because if we're still having like this rhetoric inside realm, who knows what you guys are like, I'm not just trying to like blame it on you guys, but like we're saying outside of realm, people could also have that rhetoric. So by pointing it out inside realm, outside of realm, we're going to be more inclusive and have that better rhetoric rather than just saying like China is bad and like saying she is belligerent.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, you can do the motion.
We have like 10 seconds left. I don't have a question.
Okay, sure.
Jonah, Fran?
I'm using my last 2 seconds, I promise. I'll try to remember that. It's just gonna be T and then K. Is everybody good? I'm gonna start time. I'm my first one. Interpretation absolutely limited to diplomatic effort for the sole purpose of ending armed conflicts in West Asia involving non-state actors, violation of either gender equality diplomacy or climate diplomacy for the broader purpose of resolving any current armed conflict between non-state actors, specifically on their C1. They just say that women are an organization, but remember, for the evidence, both sides literally have to be armed. Second, remember what Ellie tells you in summary, it's just toward keeping a bad government. It's not necessarily an internal armed conflict. It does not read that threshold we need. It is literally not topical. They never mention an internal armed conflict once the evidence. On their second argument about climate diplomacy, remember, it's hypothetical conflict, meaning it's not topical. At that point, get access into all of our links. The warranting is functionally conceded. One, we tell you on limit that if we don't have a topical debate, we're not able to have limits. That's uniquely bad because it means the argument quality is inherently no, because we're not able to have clash. Second, on education, we tell you that when you're not able to have a topical debate, you're not able to have actual education because it's impossible to prep for the inevitable proliferation of acts. That's uniquely problematic because it stymies the education we're actually able to have in the debate space. The one response they give you is that limits are big anyway. However, that limits aren't big anyway. It's a rather small topic specific to West Asian diplomacy and internal conflicts, but they make it uniquely worse. But on analytics being better already, that's not true. Remember, we tell you the back half is able to solve. The better the front half is, the better the back half, meaning we access the benefits without the harms. At that point, it's the biggest impact in the round. They say the debate space is not as important as the real world. I would argue, but we tell you topicality impacts everyone in the debate space. The point where topicality impacts every single person within the debate space. Debate space does not exist in the first place. There's no way we're able to actually have the discourse to talk about. They can see topicality is the biggest impact in the round. You don't look at the K, but on the K, they just say our rhetoric is racist. I would argue it's grandstanding without actually looking to the cards. For Semino evidence which tells you China right now is alliance building. That is why they're uniquely in threat. They can see the warranting in Semino, which tells you that China's building alliances. It's not just us implying they're a threat, it's us reading actual piece of literature. But remember, they say that the neg is not wanting dialogue. No, that's how perfect which evidence tell you we explicitly are negotiating with China right now and having diplomacy. Meaning A, we both give a justification for why China's a threat, and B, we tell you we're negotiating with them. At that point, there's no unique reason to drop us. But remember the point in which topicality literally comes first. They can see their arguments functionally on topical. You have to be in the debate space if you want to have dialogue, but they just
Do we check it?
yeah, that's not we should be there with that.
Yeah, it's gonna be Orientalism, topicality. Is anyone not ready? The best explanation they give in their last speech why China is bad is because they're quote unquote building alliances. That literally is proof of our rhetoric that they think China building alliances is bad. There's literally no warranty, as if it's just a surface level claim that China doing things like building alliances is bad. That's Orientalist as hell, describing Xi as belligerent is Orientalist, saying that China is needed to be contained is Orientalist because it's all on the underlying premise that China is a bad actor without actually engaging in warrants and actually reading them. Even if their authors say so, the way they presented it in round is so Orientalist. I implore you to read their case. It literally links it to exactly what the Turner evidence is saying. The only other thing they send is that they're negotiating right now. That's a cross application of an argument they literally dropped. It's impossible to weigh anyway, because we still tell you that they're impact out too broader than that. The two reasons to drop them are coming cold conceded in every single speech. A is because representations matter. The Turner evidence tells you that representations affect each and every stage of policy making. That means their racist justification long-term leads to racist policy. That's from Turner. But B is on face, their racist rhetoric is something you shouldn't sign your ballot with. You should just drop it. This is the biggest impact on the ground. We aren't just impacting out to the debate space, but rather the whole policymaking sphere and what people construct China as. I go outside this round and think, wow, they said China was bad and probably think this into real life without actually engaging in the warrants as to why China might be bad. That's pretty bad. At that point, go to T. They're making a new weighing argument that T is like the way we keep the whole debate sphere in place. This is A, new, but B, even so, we think racist education is not worth preserving, and that's the entire link to this in the first place. Both of our arguments are still super topical. Read the Franzman evidence. It's telling you that women are organized in Syria and Turkey is violently killing them. In fact, the end of the article literally says they're killing them. They don't tell you why we can't also solve for future conflicts. But the cleanest way to sign that is where we tell you that analytics are better. You actually have to think on your feet. But that.
Good round.
Good point.
I'm glad this is the last round. I'm losing up one.
Thanks, Christian.
Yeah, thank you.